morning, and thank you very much for inviting me to this particular day. If you go into Westminster Cathedral, you'll see on the left-hand side as you go in, halfway up the nave, a mosaic dedicated to St. Alban. And St. Alban is sometimes inaccurately described as proto-martyr of England. England as a country did not exist when he died. England was only created after the Anglo-Saxon invasions in the 5th and 6th centuries. He was proto-martyr, or is proto-martyr, of Britain. And the point about Alban is that he gave his life for the faith as somebody who had the faith passed on to him. He did not begin, of course, as a Christian. The story, which largely comes from St. Bede, the great church historian of the 8th century, is that during one of the Roman persecutions, possibly that of the Emperor Decius in the middle of the 3rd century, Alban gave shelter to a Christian priest who was trying to escape from the soldiers pursuing him. And Alban, who had been a pagan up to that point, was so impressed by the priest's witness and by the example of his faith that he became a Christian. He accepted baptism and he changed clothes with the priest and essentially allowed him to escape and gave himself up in the priest's place and was martyred accordingly. He may not have been, he almost certainly was not the only martyr in that particular persecution. The Welsh also remember Saints Aaron and Julius in the city, or rather it's a town now in Caerleon, just outside Newport, but it was then a major city occupied by the 2nd Legion. And there were probably numerous others all up and down the country. But we only have, in this particular part of Britain, the name of Alban. And of course, in later years, an abbey was founded on the spot of his martyrdom, and what grew up there was the present city of St. Albans in Hertfordshire. So the memory of St. Alban has been maintained. But the point is, who brought the faith to this country? Because there must have been a sufficient faith here for the Roman state to persecute. When Tertullian, who was a Christian writer, wrote about the year 200, he said that there were parts of Britain not conquered by the Romans, but conquered by Christ. So the faith must have arrived in this country certainly quite strongly by the 2nd century. And who brought that faith was what I would call an unnamed group of missionaries. We don't know the names of these people, but nevertheless, we can just hazard a few guesses over what sort of people they were. They may have been soldiers who were secret Christians. They may have been traders. They could have been people perhaps from Gaul, which is now France, and Spain and Italy, and other places on the continent of Europe where they perhaps had a succession of bishops and where the bishops sent groups of people saying, well, cross over to Britain, see what you can do. And that is how the faith must have arrived one way or another in this country. That was the first phase. I think we can say there were two more broad phases of mission in this country. And one of them came, of course, the next phase comes with St. Augustine of Canterbury. When the Romans left Britain and the Anglo-Saxons or English invaded, the faith, by all appearances, was completely extinguished. We don't know exactly what happened to the native Britons living here, the Romanized Britons. Some say they were exterminated in an act of ethnic cleansing. Some say they were enslaved. Possibly they just intermarried and intermingled with the invading English, and the result was a composite nation. But most of all, the faith survived in places like Cornwall and Wales, being high ground. The English were initially unable to get into those countries. And of course, it appeared in Ireland and in Scotland. That, of course, is another story, and perhaps Father Liam later on may talk about the influence of St. Patrick. But the point really here is that when St. Augustine was sent by Pope Gregory the Great at the end of the 6th century to bring the faith back to this country, and that was a specifically named mission we know all about, he was successful and the faith did begin to spread. But I would think that possibly there may have been already an undercurrent, a base of Christian experience in this country, which meant the rate of conversion was made that much easier. One of the most significant things about the Anglo-Saxon history of Christianity in this country is that areas of Britain or areas of England which became Christian were able to provide in a very short space of time men capable of being bishops. For example, Sussex, which was a very remote and rather poor part of the country, it isn't now, but it was then, with very poor farming, was very slow in accepting Christianity. Yet within 20 years of that, a man from there became the Archbishop of Canterbury. That, I don't think, could have happened unless there was already a groundswell, an undercurrent of Christianity already present. So perhaps Christianity was not entirely extinguished with the departure of the Romans and the coming of the English. And then for the next 1,000 years, Christianity remained strong in this country. There came the tragedy of the Reformation, when this country broke with Rome and when King Henry VIII established his own church. And obviously the country continued as Christian, but the Catholic Church had to go underground for the next couple of 100 years. And it was restricted largely to remote places in this country, to places in the north of England, especially in Lancashire and Yorkshire, but also with powerful and fairly wealthy families which refused to change, which held on to the faith. The most notable, of course, is the Dukes of Norfolk, a very powerful family in the country which have always remained Catholic, and they have defied all the fines and all the pressure to try and abandon their Catholic faith. And it was those people, more than anything, who provided centres around the country where priests were able to come, illegally of course, to celebrate Mass and to maintain the conferring of the sacraments upon people in the locality. They were of course betrayed at various points. Anybody could know they would get on with the authorities if they informed them there is a Catholic priest in this particular area. And that's why we have such a strong history of martyrdom and why we commemorate all of the English martyrs on May the 4th every single year, to remember those brave men and women, because it wasn't just simply priests, it was lay people, lay men and lay women who gave witness to the faith throughout the whole of their lives. I'll just take one in particular. There is the name of St. Margaret Clitheroe. We have her, of course, as a named missionary, as somebody who gave the witness to the faith, and we know her name. But she was a baptized Anglican, and she found out about the Catholic faith, and she converted to Catholicism, and then even her husband, who remained an Anglican, was nevertheless tolerant of what was happening. So there is one particular thing that somebody must have given their witness of their own faith to Margaret, who then became a Catholic at a very difficult and very dangerous time to be a Catholic in this country. Moving further forward, what we also come to is the 19th century. And this was the time when gradually it became acceptable, perhaps not acceptable, that's not really the right word, but it became slightly easier to be a Catholic. It was still problematic. If churches were built, they had to be disguised to look like houses. And even though there were various relief acts, what was called Catholic emancipation, through a series of acts of parliament given from the 18th century onwards, there were still various restrictions placed upon the Catholic faith. But what actually gave the faith in this country a tremendous surge. And I think this is possibly where yourselves, as members of the Slovak and other ethnic communities, it's very important. What gave this faith a surge in this country was the huge amount of Irish immigration in the 19th century. The great famine in Ireland in the 1840s encouraged the Irish to leave Ireland. Large numbers, of course, went to North America or to Australia. But also a large number simply crossed the Irish Sea to places like Liverpool still and Manchester, still with very large Irish communities. And of course they came to London, the capital city, and to other parts of the country. And I would probably say that most English Catholics today, the vast majority, have got Irish connections. My own mother's maiden name is O'Neill, which is obviously an Irish name. She wasn't born in Ireland, but her grandparents came from there. They came to this country. Now, they came in their thousands, and it was my mother's example which converted my father to the faith. And I was brought up, obviously, as a Catholic. And that example was followed throughout the whole of this country over those 150 years or so since the arrival of the Irish in large numbers. In certain cases, again, we do have the names of people. I've mentioned in the booklet, which is in front of you, the fact that one of the most famous of all the Anglican converts to Catholicism in the 19th century, Blessed John Henry Newman, who was beatified by Pope Benedict 2 years ago in Birmingham Archdiocese, he was introduced to the faith. He knew about Catholicism, of course, but the person who received him was Blessed Dominic Barbary from Viterbo in Italy, who was a Passionist father, and he was one of many who came to this country in order to try and bring England back to the faith. And there would be others whose names we don't know, who by their example and witness helped to try and bring about that rate of conversion. And when somebody like John Henry Newman converted, there were a whole series of other conversions as well. For example, Cardinal Manning, who I think used to be buried up at Mill Hill in North London, is now buried in the crypt of Westminster Cathedral. I think he is. He, of course, was a convert to the faith. He'd been a married Anglican clergyman, his wife died, and eventually he became a Catholic, rising to become Cardinal Archbishop of Westminster. So that is another example that we have. And that all of those people, these unknown men and women who came to this country from Ireland and from Italy, of course, as well, in the later 19th century, have given witness to their faith and helped to convert and convince others. Since the Second World War, there has been another flood of various from various countries coming in, particularly, for example, the Poles, because of the large number of Polish servicemen who fought for this country in the Second World War. A number of them came and settled here afterwards. And I remember, for example, living in Hereford, right in the far west of this country, where the Marist fathers were based. And they came from Poland and ministered to the Polish community in that particular part of the country. And of course, since then, there have been people coming from all parts of not just of Europe, but also of the world. If you look in any of the diocesan directories, you will see the great list of ethnic chaplaincies that we have in London. So from what I just want to conclude with is that the whole strength of mission, we can certainly find the names of great people over the centuries. Besides Cyril and Methodius and their work in Eastern Europe, we've got, of course, St. Augustine of Canterbury. We've got people like Blessed John Henry Newman. We have any number of others who helped to build up the faith in this country. But I would say that the bulk of the work is done largely perhaps through the inspiration, through the witness, and through the example of people like yourselves. of people who live out their Catholic faith before others, and to therefore draw people who have that yearning for something deeper in their lives, that you draw people closer to God. And that is what I think mission is all about. Yes, it is about those who are the great names, but there's also those who are not named at all. The ones, for example, who live up, who we venerate on All Saints' Day. They are the ones who don't make the stained glass league of all the great saints, but those are the ones whom we remember. And in consequence, this very conference here about mission is one of which you can be justly proud, and one in which you recognize that you are the ones who are taking mission to others. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Father Julian. I know you will be leaving soon, so I'd like to open the floor for one or two questions. And while you prepare your question, I'll start with one. You've talked about history, about past missionaries, but what constitutes a good missionary today, in your view?
What constitutes a good missionary today, I would say, is somebody who is, in view of the sort of the very cynical atmosphere that there is, it's somebody who isn't going to perhaps not push too hard. I think that there is a danger that if we try and constantly push things forward too much, people react against it. When you walk around this country, you'll sometimes see people standing in the street. I mean, there was somebody outside Oxford Circus Underground Station yesterday, for example, with a placard, holding it up and bellowing into as I'm bellowing into a microphone, bellowing into a microphone about what Jesus actually can do for people. And most people were just ignoring him or mocking him. And I think there is a danger that the fact that we have so many examples of this. It's not as if people have never heard of Jesus. Of course, they have heard about him, but they have heard about him in a negative sense, from bad example, and possibly from people who just seem to be a little bit on the edges of sanity in terms of what we hear in being sort of shouted into microphones and so on in our public squares and meeting places. And I think, therefore, mission, to be a good missionary today, is to give a quiet example of loving concern for your fellow human beings, perhaps through what you actually do, whatever jobs you actually do. Don't necessarily push it, but perhaps in terms of any charities that you support. Somebody will say, well, why do you support that charity? Why do you do that? Because I'm a Christian. That's why, and I think that is the best example of all. One particular example I have is of somebody I know who became a Catholic simply because she was impressed by the example of her work colleague. And all they did was they worked in a telephone exchange, and that person was so kind and so considerate that this other woman felt there must be something about the background to that person, there must be something about her religion, and she eventually became a Catholic. So I think that is a very important aspect, that you, by the example of your life and what you say and do, that is a work of missionary endeavor automatically.
Excellent. Thank you very much for an excellent answer and sharing your view. Do we have any question for Father Julian?
Thank you. Father, according to history, apparently in Britain, the threat to Catholic faith has always been an external threat, basically either the English originally and thereafter, different faith. However, nowadays we live in a civilization where tolerance is supposed to be well spread. Still, Catholics are becoming less active, not only in Britain but in Europe. Mm-hmm. So would you say that, what sort of argument could make us more optimistic about the future of Catholic, because nowadays it appears that the adversary or the enemy of faith is not external, but is with each individual, and with society more concerned with buying goods or things like that.
What sort of arguments can I give to be optimistic about the future? None. I think because of the nature of present-day society, and as you say, it's increasingly materialistic. We work in a truly missionary environment in this country, as indeed in Western Europe and perhaps North America. One of the things which I think is encouraging is, and you're from Paris, so you know what there's the example of these new movements, especially in France, quasi-monastic movements, which I think have provided a very important witness. When I went to the church of Saint-Gervais-et-Protes in Paris, they've got a community there where they celebrate the divine office throughout the day. And there's a huge number of people who come. So I think that again, it's perhaps making certain that we don't have to sort of push religion in people's faces, but if we make ourselves available in that way by showing that we are, especially in large churches and large communities, we're here for prayer and we invite people in. It's not an easy task, and I don't think there's any easy answer to it at all. But I think one of the examples of history is that we go through a whole series of dips and troughs. And I think we're very much in a trough at the moment. But even in medieval times, for example, right back in the 12th century, there was when the Cistercians came to this country, the monastery of Rievaulx in Yorkshire had something like 160 monks and 500 lay brothers. That's 650 men living in one monastery. And that was just one of, over 500 monasteries throughout the whole of Europe. And we think, oh, that's because it was the Middle Ages. Well, come to the 14th and 15th centuries, and the number of monks had dropped considerably. The monastic impulse had gone. But at the Reformation, there was a new impulse, the foundation of the orders of the clerks regular, like the Jesuits, like the Oratorians, and so on. The Holy Spirit, I think, will allow a person's charism to be expressed in a particular direction. And therefore, if an existing order becomes old and becomes tired, it becomes unappealing, other orders and movements will spring up, as with the new movements in France and I think in the United States as well. We haven't really got, I don't see many examples of new movements in this country, but that really is a question of time. Perhaps that's an example, something perhaps for people here to take home with you.